Welcome back, YouTube. I'm fresh from the gym. Well, technically, I went for a run on the beach today because I'm living in Florida currently. So today we're going to talk about Uranus or Uranus, but I prefer to say Uranus. So expect the unexpected. Uranus is another outer planet, generational planet. Uranus is going to stay in a house or a sign like 7-8 years. All right. And like our Uranus return happens 84 years. So if you live to be 84, you'll have a Uranus return. And this guy, we'll give him we'll call him a he. Uranus is not as difficult, in my opinion, as like Saturn or Pluto or even Neptune, because Uranus has such an abruptness to it that like whatever change it brings, it's like ripping off a band-aid. And there's not this element of grief. Like a lot of other planets will bring up grief, not Uranus. Uranus is like really quick. And it's one of the harder ones to predict. We can predict change is coming. That's all we can predict. We can't say what kind necessarily, just because the very nature of Uranus is to expect the unexpected. Uranus is responsible for tsunamis, for earthquakes, and all of the disruptions that happen that we're like, oh, I didn't see that. Yeah, like when Uranus changes signs, a lot of times there will be a big world event, right? So let everybody know I have switched over. When Uranus shows up in the natal chart, it represents an area of our life where there's Uranus is synonymous with the 11th house and Aquarius. Okay. So the things that, let me just back up. The things that we can relate. Yeah. With Uranus would be things like revolution, radical change, innovation. It's the higher octave of communication and or technology as opposed to Mercury, right? So when we're talking Uranus, we're talking big scale, grand scale, grid style type, major events, major responsibility for shifts, right? When Uranus is in the natal chart, it tends to show up as an area where there's a little bit more abruptness in our lives, maybe eccentricity. And there's a little nuance around how we relate, because Uranus represents the people, really and truly, and the people's capacity to make grand change, I guess. So like when Uranus is kind of passing through the sky, we can kind of see like upheaval depending on where it's at or what it's going through. And if we look at like a country's chart, whatever it's aspecting, we're gonna be like, oh, people are gonna rise up, you know? So Uranus is responsible for that. Now, when Uranus is in the, let's say Uranus is in your 7th house, that might, 7th house is partnerships, you know, it's kind of represents, you know, the other. 1st house is self, 7th house, the other, the scales. It might make you attracted to or attract people who are a little more eccentric, out of the box, you know, independent thinkers. That's very Uranian. And unfortunately, it seems like 7th house Uranus placements guaranteed divorce. Not that like divorce rates aren't really high as it is, but if you have Uranus in the 7th house, you're kind of guaranteed to have a divorce. And that's just the way the book says it. That's not me, but that's kind of like known in astrology. If you have Uranus in the 5th house, like I do, then you're real quick to gain creative insight and start things just out of the blue, very abruptly. You're kind of seen as a revolutionary leader if it's over in the 10th house, and your capacity again to create radical change when it comes to how you show up in the world in terms of the gifts you give to the world, the career you have, right? If it's in the first house, it might reflect a personality that's very eccentric and, I hate to say unstable, but Uranus is not stable, right? So because it's a generational planet, it's one of those that we don't really get a lot of relationship to unless it's hitting a personal point via transit, right? Our sun, our moon, our ascendant, our descendant. Obviously, if Uranus is going to change houses, where that energy focus is going to be will also shift. I had a significant shift when Uranus went from my 10th to 11th. And so you'll feel that if you're conscious of it, if it's going to make a transit to a personal point, what would this look like? Radical change and unforeseen change. So when we feel it coming, think of the nervous system, think of anxiety, think of like, I think something's about to, like a shoe's about to drop, right? That's very Uranus. Like when you feel like that anxious energy, you kind of know something's coming. That's very Uranus. So then like if it makes an aspect, let's say to your ascendant, right, there'll be a radical change on your persona. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean bad. I've lost jobs during Uranus transits. I've gained promotions during Uranus transits. So it can go either way. The bottom line with Uranus is that it really just sweeps out whatever it is. It's like, okay, you're totally done with this. Let's just like transplant you to something else, whether that's unemployment or a totally new friendship group, right? Like we don't know until it happens, but that's how it happens. And again, there's no real grief because when the shift happens with Uranus, it's kind of like, oh, I needed that. Even if it's not a good change, you're like, I didn't have the courage to just do it on my own, but I knew I needed to do it. Right. And so the change happens very abruptly, but we welcome it because we're so excited to be like in the relief aspect of it. So Uranus really, while it brings this radical, abrupt shift, it also, I let people know, like, these are changes that you don't see coming, but you're going to welcome when they happen. And for better or for worse, right? You'll just be like, oh, I thought I'd be more sad over that, but actually I'm glad that's done, right? Like you really just were done and ready for whatever happens. And so there's kind of like an excitement with Uranus transits, in my opinion, because they're not painful. They're not painful like Pluto or stressful like Saturn. They're just like, okay, finally that's gone. Finally that's done, or finally that's here, or whatever. It's just a really nice shift. Now, I don't know if I've explained this before here on YouTube, but like one thing that is really critical to understand about transits is that if we're operating from the lower octave and a planet transits and it's a more uncomfortable transit, if we're in avoidance and we are not trying to deal with our issues, these transits will show up as events, like a literal event in our life. Car accidents, divorces, breakups, job losses, whatever, right? If we are conscious and we're leaning in to whatever is around us and happening and we're kind of feeling it out and we're ready, these show up as inner shifts, right? So like paradigm shifts, really. So like the more conscious awareness you have with a transit, the easier it is, because it doesn't have to be this like, hit you over the top of your head kind of event. It can actually just be like a mindset change. And that you're like, oh, yeah. I was ready for that paradigm shift. Like, okay, I couldn't see before, now I do, and I feel better. So yeah, I mean, Uranus is really just, it's that higher intellect. It's the genius. It's just that insight that you just didn't know was available to you until it was available to you. And so that's why like Aquarius, Uranus, genius, intellect, the mind, you know, the smartest people, those who do innovate, the technological changes, that's all very Uranian. And so on a bigger scale, that's what we see when Uranus moves around. On a smaller scale or on a personal level, we kind of see those shifts happen, those radical insights or changes happen in our personal life when Uranus comes around. So I like Uranus. I welcome Uranus transits. They tend to bring relief ultimately. However, like usual, when a planet does start to make its round, those first 2 hits or 3 or 4, if it's a 5 hit, yeah, there's a anxious uncertainty, anxiety. You're like, she was about to drop. You can sense that like what's going on is not like comfortable anymore. But then when that shoe does drop, you're really relieved. It's like, it's kind of a welcome change. So I hope that that was helpful. As usual, you know, subscribe to my channel if you enjoy the discussions that I do, the talks and the rambling that I go on about. And if you want a reading, if you want me to look at your horoscope and talk about what's happening in your life, hit me up. My email address is below. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later, guys. Bye.